right, hope everyone had a good lunch. Excited to be back on the stage. Earlier today, I had a great conversation with Eric about cloud code, and now I'm super thrilled to dive even deeper into how AI is shaping the next generation of software development with this amazing panel. Initially, we planned to do this panel the safe way, carefully going through our agreed-upon topics. But sitting here today, I noticed something, is that most of our speakers avoided making future predictions, as a wise and responsible person would do, given how fast things change. But here's the thing. Our panel is literally called the future of software development. So if someone needs to make bold predictions, it's going to be this panel, even at the risk of looking maybe funny or silly in a few months. Here's how we're going to kick things off. So each panelist will give a quick self-introduction and immediately giving your spicy or contrarian prediction about the future of software development. And here's the twist. We're going to involve all of you, our audience. You will be our contrarian meter. So after each prediction, we're going to do a show of hands. If you agree, raise your hand. If no hands, that's peak contrarian, exactly the fun we're aiming for. All right, so ready? Let's dive in. Let's start.
Hey, everybody. Andrew Filev here. I'm founder and CEO of a company called Zencoder. We built awesome AI agents. Prior to this, I built a company called Reiki, sold it for $2.25 billion. I'm generally a very reasonable guy, so I don't know if my predictions are going to be contrarian for any of you, but sometimes I like to take the first principle thinking to its extreme. So for me, I think less contrarian prediction, I think there's going to be a 10x more software written. I personally, being in this day-to-day, I do not see this as contrarian. So, but it's kind of funny to follow that trail down the rabbit hole. What this means is actually that 10x more software is got to be ran somewhere, and that's going to be ran by hyperscalers. So house always wins. So that's my spicy prediction. Not contrarian, but spicy. We're going to engineers are going to be 10 times more productive. We're going to create 10 times more software agents, and frontier labs are going to help you do that. But the funny thing is that hyperscalers are going to take their cut from all of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. So 10x more software is going to be written. Raise your hand if you agree. OK, not that contrarian, but insightful. All right, Idan.
Hey, everyone. I'm Fouad. I'm on the agents research team at OpenAI. And let's see my contrarian take. I think the future of software development will look more like software management, where you'll have many agents running in parallel, and where today we're usually triggering these agents, and we're having to put more in than we're necessarily sometimes getting out. I think we'll find that we will be struggling to keep up with the agents and the pace at which they're working. So I suppose from development to management.
Cool. Raise your hand if you agree. OK, more contrarian. Awesome.
Hi, I'm Nuno, founding engineer at LangChain. My take, I don't know how spicy this is, but I think we going to be one of the main skills to be a really good software engineer. Because prompt engineering is really nothing more than specifying the problem well. And as I'm sure we all know, that's a big part of writing good software is knowing what you're writing it about.
All right, let's do a quick show of hands. I think even more contrarian. Great. Now our last speaker.
I have to be more contrarian? OK. Hi, my name's Idan, and I lead GitHub Next, which is GitHub's long bets team. And we're the people that created original Copilot before Microsoft turned it into a whole brand. GitHub Copilot, the one that wrote the software, as well as all sort of these follow-up things. My contrarian take is that where the next 40 years of the tool that people use to author software is not going to look like the thing that we're currently using. Like where we are today, it's like when we invented the graphical display and we were using Vim in a window. And now we're doing the same thing, but we're like slapping a chat sidebar on the side of it. And I don't think that's what the next 40 years of software development looks like. I think we need new UXs to make all that parallelism happen, right? So, and all that prompting easier. So that's my contrarian take.
All right, new form factor in 4 years. Raise your hand.
Yes, fewest hands.
Yes. Awesome, amazing. Well, thank you so much for sharing all those brave and spicy predictions. I think we got the most contrarian from Idan. So I would love to start our discussion there. Idan, can you elaborate a bit more on what you mean by what do you see as the new form factor in the next 4 years? And maybe we can get some reactions from other panelists.
I'll be honest up front, I don't know. This is exactly sort of the area of research right now. We were just talking in the green room about how we say generative AI, and people think that means that it's about generating code, because that's what we've been using this magic box to do for the last few years, right? It's, you know, I type in a prompt, or I just wait there, and then it suggests some code for me. So it's doing some typing on my behalf. But as a developer, typing is not where I spend my time. And all the research on software development says that most of the time is spent understanding a code base. Where is this stuff in the code base? How does this code work? If I need to change it, what do I need to touch in order to change it, right? So I think these interfaces are going to have to help us less with the typing, this magical, like the piano that plays itself kind of feeling, and more with the understanding, the reasoning, these tasks that are actually the bulk of what I do as a software developer. So.
From typing to vibing.
Full stack vibing.
Yeah, I think to build on that, I think we'll see this evolution, and even when you are using a lot of these agents often, it's less even about, to some degree, even the prompting as much as it is the QA that you end up having to do at the end of the process, making sure that expectations are meeting reality. And I think what we'll see is a lot of, and part of what we're focusing on our team is how do we bring a lot of the things that we know about in training into test time kind of production inference, and then also very quickly iterate and bring what we're seeing from how people are using these agents. Often it's you know, some combination of the model might generate some new web page, and you need to go click around to make sure it works. Ideally, the model could do that as well. So using computer use to kind of complete that loop. And I think taking a lot of those kind of QA workflows where you will still always have to just keep increasing your bar of what satisfactory completion looks like, but bringing more of those into the actual development workflow, where previously your IDE would just stop at just editing the code, or the agents stop at editing the code. Now they actually need to build, test, run.
One thing I would add to build on that is obviously these models write in the same period of time. They write a bunch more code than we could. So I think kind of a downstream consequence of that is there will be a much more code for someone to review, whether that's another model, but very likely at least part of that is going to be down to, you know, the human that prompted the model to write that code in the first place will probably want to take a look and make sure it's doing what it should do. And I don't think the current, you know, IDEs are really designed for code review. They're designed for code editing. I don't know what it looks like, but that's probably something that will be part of it.
Amazing.
I've got a little bit of a contrarian view. So one, I generally think that long-term predictions with exponentials do not make a lot of sense, right? So prefer to focus on kind of a short term, right? And in the short term, I think as humans, there's what you would know better is like 20 million professional software engineers right now, right? And we've been kind of growing that number steadily over the last, 4 decades. So there's a lot of biological agents figuring out what's the best way to do things and how to best scale them from their, you know, old days of IBM and whatnot. And so I feel whatever stack we have today in terms of tools, processes, should work to some degree. And so in the near future, I don't necessarily think we got to reinvent the wheel. I think in general, AI is not necessarily trying to reinvent thinking, it's trying to mimic the data that's fed to it by humans, right? And so from that, it's logical to envision that we don't necessarily have to reinvent the software development lifecycle, the software tooling, we just have to support it better and help people be more productive. And so in that sense, one of my sort of practical predictions is, I think if you remember, some of you remember kind of that agile process tenants and kind of agile revolution, how it moved from very siloed functional teams into cross-functional team, where you have a team that can take something from A to Z. You got the product owner there, you got engineers there, testers there, like everybody in one unit. And I think we might get to the point where there's like cross-functional individuals, if you will, right? So instead of like now you have to have a team with PO and engineer and QA and whatnot, you can have an individual which enabled by AI can actually do a lot of those things. And the reason why in the first place Scrum moved from this very siloed organization to cross-functional team is because by bringing things together, you remove the communication overhead. And to your point, right, today there's a lot of time spent in software teams on that overhead, not necessarily on coding. So if you can collapse it to one person who is enabled with this AI agents to do their work so much better, faster, and across different areas, then not only you're doing that, but you're cutting a lot of that bureaucracy and communication overhead. So I think part of the future of software development in the near term is kind of those cross-functional individuals who are generally professional across a lot of different areas. AI enables them to be much more so, and then maybe they kind of, in certain areas, they're super good. And again, since they're still working in some company with a team of other people, if they're not so good in any other area, they can pat somebody on the shoulder and kind of ask them to help them out.
100%. I think in the last generation, we're seeing PM as engineers are two separate functions, and they have pretty clear boundary. But recently, I think we're seeing the rise of product engineers, whereas PM have more engineering capability using vibe coding tool, and also engineers has better sense of product and then contributing to product design part. So definitely resonate with that. I think one point Nuno and Fouad mentioned is IDEs are not doing a lot of things for us just yet, right? For example, like code reviews, deployment, and also like QA testing, and we're trying to leverage computer as agent. I would love to dive into what's still stubbornly hard, right? What's the remaining hard part of software engineering that AI is not help solving us just yet, and then what are opportunities there?
One thing that I think is hard is, especially if you think of a large code base that you've been working on for months or years, there's going to be like a lot of knowledge about that code base that is in your head, and that when you ask some pointed question, like a one sentence to the LLM model to write out something for you, when you ask that question internally, you have all that context that's in your head, but obviously the model doesn't have that context because that all the things about that code base, the files you learn to ignore because they're like deprecated things that shouldn't be there anymore, or all the little mistakes that you made along the way but you didn't remove, all that stuff is implicit to you, but it's not being made available to the models that are working on it. So I don't know exactly what that looks like, but I think this is probably like the last final task that's going to take the longest to port over to model assisted.
I mean, I'd ask, is that not just a form of context selection? Like
it's not there.
It's not, it doesn't exist or right now. I mean, it's not just that context selection needs to happen. It's how do we clue the models into where they can find things? And in the database world, we talk about indexes. I'm trading eager compute and storage in return for the ability to produce a result to a query more quickly at runtime. And so what kind of indexes do we need to be building on top of code bases in order for us to deliver these kinds of experiences that we want to do without the human sitting there being like, oh, okay, now another spinner for 5 minutes, whatever, which sucks. I hate that.
Yeah, I think there's definitely this, I think there's two sides of this. One is the tribal knowledge that you're describing where just by talking, you can ask someone and get a response in a minute that would otherwise take you, maybe like an hour or two to read the code. I think, and there are, areas of memory and, context stuffing that are very important in selection so you don't kind of overpopulate the window. I think there's another side of it that's been pretty interesting to see with our latest reasoning models that actually genuinely surprised me when we started initially using O3 internally, and you kind of see it with both O4 Mini and O3 that you didn't really see with O3 Mini, which is pretty interesting, that it's able to actually pretty intelligently decide what is relevant and use, because we're including more training tasks, that actually teach it that that's actually an important thing to consider, not just go off and make the change as instructed, but to actually understand. Now, there's a trade-off there, similar to what you're describing, where it can sometimes spend more tokens learning about the context before it makes changes. But some of the issues that we saw previously, where it would just do exactly as you asked without a second thought, and that typically isn't exactly what you want. I want to be able to ask an ambiguous question and have it disambiguate and kind of get a little bit deeper based on the code base. But it's actually been pretty surprising, even with agents, like we released Codex CLI last week, having a model that has just even access to a terminal that can run code, run commands to search your code base. It can actually very quickly understand, oh, I probably don't need to be looking in the node modules folder, or maybe I should go look at the Git history. Really giving the model that kind of longer leash. And I think the longer those leashes become and the more in distribution the training tasks are, I think we'll see models that can overcome some of those kind of gaps around tribal knowledge.
Well, one metaphor that I use in my own head, I don't know if I can communicate it well, it's, somebody said about cultures, right? So cultures in the companies, it's not what sort of makes them look like each other, what makes them different, right? And so it's like the quirky parts of your company culture define who the company is. And so I feel that applies to kind of the role of human in this future, where the role of AI is to be kind of the common denominator, the common wisdom, right? The principles that would work for everybody, their techniques that work, and then the role of human is actually to bring that sort of quirkiness, that specialty that actually makes it stand out and win in whatever competitive task it's used to. Because economy is a competitive environment, right? Where my company competes with yours or somebody else's. And so, again, AI will help level up the playing field for everybody, but then ultimately one of those companies got to win, right? And that's going to be what human brings to the table with their own quirkiness and out of distribution thinking that, and again, like startup worlds, 10,000 will fail and one will succeed. So, a lot of those companies might fail, but then once in a while that quirkiness kind of leads to that evolutionary progress that creates better product, better company, and whatnot.
Yeah, I think that quality of, as I frame it as a taste, where it's really the distinction between, a given company, given members within a team, that you see it in coding style in terms of how you would prefer to kind of name your functions, how you prefer to organize them, but then also in terms of the final output, the taste of an organization where I think there's two versions that can manifest. One is where a lot of software generated by AI looks very similar to each other. I think that's a less exciting world than one where we're able to bring back some of the things we saw in the early 90s, where people were just trying things. They're really kind of accentuating that kind of quirkiness or that kind of unique taste. And I'm really excited, and we really try to push agents in that direction, where people are able to encode and identify and understand the taste of both an existing code base and kind of amplify it, but then also show different paths. And I think that's one of the, maybe going back one step to this question around the IDE and kind of what needs to happen in the software development lifecycle and what's different. I think if agents are able to generate many different attempts for a given issue, I think typically we'll have one prompt and then one output. I think what we'll expect to see is you define something like a task, maybe it's in your task tracker or some other system, and you have many agents at different levels of competency, maybe different tastes that they're all attempting the same task, and then you get to pick either through your team's taste function or having your users actually decide through A/B tests, as people do typically today with human-built features. I think that's definitely a direction where I'm optimistic that we can actually see this almost like Cambrian explosion of people's tastes really coming through in their software.
Do you think there's space for another agent to make that choice?
Yo, dog, I heard you like agents.
How deep does the rabbit hole goes?
As long as you're using O3. But no, I think that there's definitely a space for agents to review. And the way we have currently thought about it so far is these kind of code executing agents, where the main thing we want to make sure that they understand is how to actually test their work so that they're not producing buggy code, code that can't be merged. So step one is just completeness and correctness. And then the kind of next frontier beyond that we're thinking very actively about in our reasoning models, beyond even just coding, is how can they actually understand the taste of both some inherent taste of the model, which I think gets more to Andrew's point around this kind of homogenization and kind of raising the floor in some ways. We want the default output to look good and to be usable, to be accessible, all the things that we like in good software, but then also make sure that it can give people options. And I think there's a bunch of different coding tools that have been amazing for people to try many different takes all in parallel and then pick the one that feels best for their use case.
Yeah, the taste really reminds me of a recent story with my front-end engineer, because personally I'm mostly writing machine learning and back-end code, and then with the help of all the amazing models and products, now I can contribute to my front-end code base, and my engineers hated it. Basically, they told me, please stop contributing, to our code base. You are now generating, code that really adheres to the best practices. So I was wondering, how would you say, how can we better leverage, vibe coding or AI code that can really, be meaningful contribution to a very large, mature production level code base? What are some best practices that can make that happen?
I can maybe do an initial stab. I think part of it is making sure that the base models are representative of this. It starts all the way down to pre-training and making sure that we're starting with the best possible foundation. And then I think at every level of our stack, and as we're scrutinizing kind of what goes into our training runs, making sure that we are able to both respect kind of user preferences, so it's not just homogenizing, but then also making sure that we're teaching it how to work in these very complex large code bases. But then the rest of it, I think, is in the software harness and how are you prompting it correctly. But you were going to say something.
I can elaborate on the next layer. So there's their model layer, right? And then there's kind of an application layer on top. So one, context is the king. And luckily, their new generation of models also pick the style better from the context. So you have to do less kind of wrangling or prompting to force that. They start picking up on clues and comply with that better. But I say kind of, again, now I'll go a little bit from the super short term to still short term, but like 6 months ahead, whatever, 12 months ahead. At some point, you will stop giving a crack about the style, right? So what you will care more about just verification that you don't have new cybersecurity issues introduced, right? That that it's scalable, performant, that you don't break anything in the regression. So, because again, when it's 90% human, 10% AI, yes, style matters. When it's 10% human, 90% AI, and you're moving at 10x pace, you don't care about style. You care about the functional requirement. By functional, I mean broadly functional, right? The requirements, does the patch meet it or does it not? And for that, you need regression testing, which again, going back to my previous point, that software industry have worked for 40 years to develop the best practices. Some of our customers have 30,000 regression tests, right? So like it's a crime not to use that to verify the work that AI does. And as long as it meets all the criteria, it looks good, it feels good, it doesn't have any security issues, and it complies with the regression test and new end-to-end tests, why do you care what style is it written? So I think that's kind of mental transition that at some point will happen where people will stop caring about their details of the style and just, hey, if it works, I don't care.
So what is vibe coding for, right? Like we talk about it, now we're all excited about this new capability that we didn't have 2-3 years ago, right? Of like, I just vibe with it, man. I hit tab and everything's fine. But the reality is that it doesn't adhere, as people experience, to the semantic style of the code base. And one day, the models will all get bigger, they'll all have 10 million token windows, and we'll be able to shove the entire repository into the window, and maybe it'll take longer, but it will adhere to the thing. But even then, like what's actually stopping me from shipping software? Most of the time, it's not something about the writing of the software. It is, I need to go persuade an executive that this is the right thing to make. And in that context, vibe coding is a fantastic tool because I don't need to make something for the ages. I need to build something I can show somebody else. Like, people talk about sketching as an important tool for communicating ideas, not because it's art or it's beautiful drawing, it's because it enables me to get an idea out of my head and into yours, not in a philosophical way, but like, here, use it. What do you think, right? And then, if we like it, then we can do the expensive step of actually writing it for real. But the hard part is the earlier phase of like, we could do this 18 ways. Which one is the right one? And for that purpose, vibe coding, fantastic. So it doesn't need to be one or the other. It can be like, I'm iterating here on a branch, and don't worry, this is not going to stay in production. This is for the purpose of showing you what's in my head. And maybe one day it grows up into actually being able to produce production-ready code, but I have a hard time estimating how far away that is. Maybe you have a better sense for that.
I mean, on the production-ready side, I think it really comes down to the prompting. I think maybe this is my most controversial opinion is I don't really like the term vibe coding. And it's not because I don't think it makes sense as a premise. I think especially for non-technical audiences, being able to just kind of communicate their almost like stream of consciousness ideas to it and have that in code. But maybe part of it's because I work in it all day and I take it so seriously that it feels almost like it trivializes the kind of level of technical requirements to get it really good. And I think that when you are prompting these models or how you actually, so just briefly on like the context window item, I actually find that cutting down and kind of clearing the context window to be the most effective, whether I'm using ChatGPT as a consumer or I'm using one of these coding agents, is actually less context is better because it's less likely to confuse the model for irrelevant content. And that actually the kind of self-distillation of having it first explain the code base, read it, and then write its own kind of description of what actually matters, or having it evaluate what is the style guide of this code base as it understands it. And I think that's where, and we do plan on kind of releasing more of these kinds of techniques of how we found it to be successful. But I think that is kind of, in my mind, the distinction is it's still a code executing agent that you're working with. There is still a vibing component to it. But I think the amount of workflow steps, just like in any software development lifecycle, where you really treat it as a professional production-ready process. We use Codex extensively internally, and there was a lot of things we had to do, as you can imagine, to get it right before we could even ship it externally, let alone really kind of maximize it across the organization. But yeah.
Great. We have covered some deep ground, and before we wrap up, I want to do some quick rounds of rapid-fire questions. Sure. All right. That's the first one is one skill every developer should master next year.
QA.
Context management.
Context management.
Just use AI. Like, just use it. Like, everybody's just like, how do I get the most value out of this? And you just use it. You're not going to learn how to ride a bike by reading a book. You need to ride the bike until you ride it. So I still stick by that one.
Just use it.
Dito. All three.
Awesome. Next up, biggest dev hype you are skeptical about right now.
That you can vibe code to production right now. I mean, you can vibe code to now some prototype. My friends do it all the time, but not to production today.
Cursor. Okay, that's my
Do we have
job.
any cursor engineers in the crowd?
I further to this thing of like, the future of the IDE not looking like the last 40 years of the IDE. Like, I think it's a great product. VS Code's a great product. Windsurf's a great product. I don't think any of them are what the next 40 years look like. So that's my spicy.
I'd say the shift away from the terminal. I think the reason why we've bet so hard on the terminal is that it's an existing interface where users are already used to managing many programs in parallel. And I think that what we'll see is a kind of resurgence of terminal-focused applications that can run, whether it's on your local machine or it's on a remote server. But I think bringing back the terminal is my bet.
I think I would say multi-agent. I think people make their AI things very complicated without first trying out the simple approaches that are probably going to work better.
Awesome. Last question. So we have 4 pioneers building dev tools for developers. What is your most exciting or looking forward to feature they're going to release soon, if you can share?
Who wants to go first?
I can't share.
All right, I'll go. So we launched a product last week, Codex CLI. We're very excited about what it can do for folks. I think one of the distinctions that we've heard from people is that it's not as useful for the vibe coder audience because it lives within your terminal. There's definitely improvements we want to make there, but I think this focus on professional software developers, you can see, and I think we actually announced some amount of these, but we'll be adding support for MCPs and a bunch of other features, but I think just briefly on MCPs, I think seeing more people develop CLIs as the primary way that they provide tools to models is, I think, a really important thing that people are not accounting for. So very excited to release more there.
I'll share a little bit. I think next three months we'll see much more done, not just on the coding side, but on the testing side and how those two work together. I think that's going to be new horizon.
Verification is king.
One feature that we've launched recently that I'm quite excited about is GenUI, which I think the idea of co-locating your UI code with your agent code is very interesting and can let you make new things.
We just handed off like two of the large projects, which was Copilot Workspace and Spark. And so now we're at the top of our cycle, and I don't know yet because we're still in sort of like mess around and find out mode. But a lot of our energies now are going into this notion of code understanding, code navigation. And some of the early things that we have cooking in the lab, we're not ready to talk about them yet, but it's really exciting as a developer to be like, where is this? I need to add a forgot password flow. What files do I need to touch? Where is it? Show me a few different approaches. You know, the fact that that's possible now, and it's not just like, here's a suggestion, autocomplete ghost text. You know, but like getting out of that and into like a pair programmer for thinking. That's definitely the kind of stuff that we're really excited about. So.
All right, with that, thank you very much to our 4 amazing panelists for putting their reputation on the line and making those bold predictions. Thank you very much.